Let's have a look at what's making news in print and online this morning. And we're joined from Canberra by Ebony Bennett, who's the Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. Good morning to you. Welcome to News Breakfast.
G'day, thanks for having me.
One of the subjects we often talk about on this show is the lack of doctors in regional areas, just, you know, the pressure on those who are there to keep working well beyond when they would normally retire. But what's the answer?
Well, the New South Wales Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, is on the front pages this morning, really requesting that the Commonwealth intervenes to prevent what he is calling a fast approaching apocalypse when it comes to GPs, and asking the Commonwealth to step in and really fast track the accreditation and migration of overseas born GPs to help meet that shortfall that you were talking about there. We know there's not enough GPs who are graduating and going down that path of choosing to be a general practitioner. I think something like only about 13% of graduates are choosing to be a GP. So it's a huge area of concern, and there's kind of been a bit of history of chronic underfunding here, where what we're paying doctors who bulk bill, for example, is putting a lot of pressure in terms of costs for GPs as well. So a few different problems there, but the New South Wales Health Minister asking the government to step in and fast-track some overseas GPs to help fill that gap.
OK, we'll see how quickly that can be achieved. Hey, staying in New South Wales, Ebony, let's go to the Sydney Morning Herald. It has the state government there looking at stamp duty reform and on, I guess, with a particular election coming up early next year.
Yeah, so it remains to be seen how popular it'll be in terms of the election, but there's no doubt it's a really important tax reform, and one that governments have traditionally, you know, shied away from, except for the ACT, as it turns out. So, yeah, the New South Wales government will be introducing this legislation to the Parliament this week. It's going to allow first home buyers to have the option whether or not they want to pay the lump sum of stamp duty or pay $400 and 0.3% of the land value of their property. So over time, this will encourage people to opt for land tax because it's obviously much cheaper, and it'll give state government a lot more secure revenue in the long term. That's certainly been the case in the ACT, where if you're buying a house of around $750,000, you're saving about a third on stamp duty compared to what you used to because of similar land tax reforms and stamp duty reforms.
And so that's going through Parliament this week?
Yeah, it'll be introduced. It's unclear at the moment how quickly it will go through the Parliament and what kind of resistance it might meet in the upper house, but it has been on the books for quite a while, and I just think it's really important that state governments and the federal government are looking at issues of revenue, because we know public spending is really increasing across the board, and they have to look at where they can raise that extra revenue to pay for the services that people really want.
Hey, let's turn to the next subject, and it's more tax talk, but this time we seem to have had a pretty good indication that we're not going to see changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts in the October budget.
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern around the Stage 3 tax cuts and a lot of debate, particularly in the last couple of weeks, about the fact that they're, you know, very unfair. They're targeted mostly towards high income earners, and of course they cost a massive amount of money, about $243 billion over the next 10 years. So not small change for the Commonwealth government facing huge budgetary pressures. But what we see here is that the Prime Minister over the weekend is more or less flagging we're not going to see any movement on Stage 3 tax cuts probably in this October budget, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the national debate won't gain pace, and we'll see some of those demands as we get closer to the May budget, because, yeah, as the Treasurer keeps saying, there's huge cost pressures on the budget, demands to pay for things like aged care, the GPs that we were just talking about, defence spending, blowouts, all of those pressures. This is perhaps one way that they could look at reining in those cost pressures for the budget.
Absolutely, but of course on the other side of the ledger is the fact that it was a huge, big election promise. I mean, you watch the political tea leaves very closely, Ebony. Do you really think in the end, you know, obviously there are huge restraints on the budget, but in terms of the skin it would lose with voters potentially if it broke this big election promise, do you reckon they'll actually go there in the end?
Yeah, look, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think no government breaks an election commitment lightly, but the question, I think, it really is going to come down to an economic one. Is it going to be responsible to carry out these stage 3 tax cuts by the time we get to the next May budget, given how much conditions are deteriorating in the economy and all those cost pressures that the government is facing? You know, about half of that $243 billion is going to be going to people earning incomes of about $180,000. The median wage is about $62,000 a year. Half of Australians earn less than $62,000 a year. This tax package isn't really helping them very much. So I think this debate has a long way to go, and there's certainly a lot more independents in the House. Greens very open to making these kinds of reforms. So I think, yeah, this debate has a long way to go, but it'll be an interesting one. I don't think people would rule it out.
And depending what the mood is also next year with the state of the global economy at that point could factor in. Just finally, let's talk about some other budget pressures, and that's in the defence realm. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this is a story in ABC today about the offshore patrol class of vehicles, OPVs I think they're called, about a $4 billion program, and really huge concerns here that there's some cost blowouts, it's running late, and it's probably facing some issues even around seaworthiness and whether it's has enough armaments. Pretty big concerns when you think about what we're actually purchasing these offshore patrol vehicles to do. And part of a bigger story that the ABC has been following about big cost blowouts in the defence budget overall, and a number of projects running a total of about 100 years late if you put them all together. So obviously the defence spending area is a big and growing area of the budget, but you have to ask yourself if there's these huge problems with the defence projects really running so late, being over budget, and then not fit for purpose at the end of all that, there really seems to be something going wrong there.
Ebony Bennett, great to have you on the program. Have a great day.